This is seatbelt solidarity. In Sweden 2014, passengers aboard a plane refused to put on their seatbelts in order to stop the deportation of a refugee to Iran. The refugee, also a father of two, had told the other passengers about his situation and they mobilized to help him. This is every step you take. In a North American town, anti-fascist community members were scratching their heads trying to work out how to stop local neo-Nazis from marching. They tried a number of different things, but nothing worked until they decided to sponsor the white supremacist march by convincing local business owners to donate money for every step that the neo-Nazis took. The money raised was donated to local charities and NGOs working to combat racism and intolerance. In the end, the whole town showed up to cheer the neo-Nazis on their march, applauding them for every step they took and making them feel pretty ridiculous. Okay, this is Bang That Pan. In India, third sector workers were trying to figure out ways to combat domestic violence. They considered targeting the families of violent husbands, but realized that the culture of acceptance was too deeply ingrained. Then they considered targeting the violent husbands themselves, but realized that behavioral change would take too long and too many generations to see any significant social impact. They thought about targeting the wives who were victims of the domestic abuse, but they didn't have the means or the resources to be able to leave their situation, and that social stigmas were also too strong a deterrent for the wives to leave the family home. Then they finally realized that the one group that did have enough social capital to leverage, but also enough distance from the situation to not endanger themselves or have too much to lose from an intervention, would be the neighbors. They decided to work on breaking the code of silence that neighbors often abided by. Okay, this is Bang That Pan too. So we've heard previously about how NGO workers were trying to stop domestic violence. They thought about targeting the husbands, the families, the wives themselves, but none of these groups worked because they were either too close to the situation or had too much to lose. Or it would just take too long to change mindsets and attitudes around domestic violence. So this is what they did. The NGO workers created a soap opera to play on the radio because this was the best way to reach the masses, bearing in mind that the socio-economic situation of the average Indian household was fairly low, meaning that they probably didn't have televisions, etc. The radio show characterized a very innocent and likable young wife who was getting beaten by her husband, which helped the listeners to build empathy with the victimized wife. In the storyline, when neighbors heard screaming coming from the house due to the wife getting beaten, they would come out banging their pans loudly to shame the husband into stopping. This modeled the target behavior and was adopted by countless real-life neighbors across India, which also saw a massive reduction in domestic violence. This is to BP or not to BP? That is the question. That's just a Shakespeare reference. You don't need to know who he is. Okay, here's the story. To denounce companies such as BP and Shell, protesters targeted the arts sector because it was sponsored by oil companies very often. They targeted arts institutions such as the Globe and also the Tate Modern, which is an art gallery / museum. They did this because they worked out that white, liberal paying customers had the visibility, social status, and the privilege to pose a real threat to any company. This is to BP or not to BP, part 2. So what did they do? They created a group called Liberate the Tate, which was a group of protesters that went into the Tate Modern, this art gallery slash museum, loaded with black oil paint, and they poured it all over themselves to represent an oil spill and the immoral activities of oil companies. Okay, this is Nestle on the shelf. Protesters wanted to stop the aggressive marketing of Nestle's baby formula in third world countries. To do this, they mounted a widespread campaign to get people to stop buying Nestle products and essentially boycott the company. The movement to boycott Nestle grew so large that Nestle was forced to negotiate with boycott organizers and agree to stop their immoral marketing campaign. Okay, this is Byron be buggin'. In 2016, the fast food restaurant chain Byron Burgers decided to take the law into their own hands by tricking over 30 of their undocumented immigrant workers into going to a supposed training day. Upon arrival, these workers were quickly rounded up by immigration officers and forcibly detained and deported. In response, protesters went into 2 of the Byron Burger restaurants and released thousands of live bugs and cockroaches in a bid to disrupt the routine serving of food through causing a health and safety issue. Protesters publicly apologized for any inconvenience that they caused to customers, but stood by their decision to denounce the dehumanizing treatment of refugees and immigrants. They went on to encourage customers to boycott Byron Burgers in solidarity. This is Operation Black Vote. Voter turnout is disappointingly low in the UK year after year after year, and it has been for a really long time. It's often thought that the ones who are the most disenfranchised and disengaged are most frequently the ones who don't vote. Those who would like to see a more equal and progressive society, but who feel that they have been let down too many times. This means that policies and decisions which are made by those in power don't respond to the needs of the marginalized, because politicians represent the people who put them in power, the people who vote. In order to widen the conversation and get issues on the agenda of the most marginalized and disaffected, and potentially increase the progressive vote, Operation Black Vote was founded to specifically target a group of people whose issues weren't being represented and who were disproportionate non-voters. These were black people. Running campaigns that specifically encouraged and incentivized black folk to vote made it more likely with each new election that new conversations about new issues would make it to the table, and the goalposts would change, forcing local MPs, politicians, and media outlets to engage with new issues.